Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Lambeau channel. Here's a headline from the Daily Hodl. Ripple executive. Bitcoin is best safe haven bet in crypto. XRP targeting cross-border payments transformation. And I read that and I thought to myself, what? What is going on here? A Ripple executive stating that Bitcoin is the best safe haven crypto asset. Well, it's not necessarily that I was surprised. I mean, you even see the likes of Brad Garlinghouse, Ripple CEO, stating that he's long Bitcoin, whereas I personally happen to be a little bit more skeptical. I mean, I'm not saying definitively that anybody's wrong if they think Bitcoin's going to be here forever, but I've made it very clear on this channel for a long time that I'm skeptical unless some sort of notable real-world utility takes hold, which I'm also skeptical of that happening, and I've gone into the rationale for that. So it's you know, it was not that it was surprising, but I just feel like it's an opportunity to think through this, because I'm not even convinced that you can make a reasonable case that any cryptocurrency today is a great safe haven. And I'm also not, to be clear in stating that, I'm also not stating that it can't ultimately be a cryptocurrency or cryptocurrencies. I'm not saying they can't ultimately be great safe haven, but we don't have data to indicate that. But before I go any further, if you would please delicately tap that like button. And also, if you're a fan of Ripple and XRP, get down with your best self by subscribing to the Moon Lambeau channel, where we be partying up in here every day. Shout out to John Luciano for tagging me in this tweet here on the Twitters, which led me to this page. So thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. And I will tell you, so even reading the headline and my little what response there, I will tell you that this didn't go so far as to steam my vegetables. My vegetables remain unsteamed at this particular junction in time, so fear not. Now, Ripple's head of global institutional markets says that if past is prologue, the stage is set for a long-term Bitcoin bull run. On a new episode of Blockstars, Brian Madigan says Bitcoin has solidified its status as a store of value and potential hedge against global economic risks. Solidified, huh? I think the data, I don't know, all the data's in to make that reasonable conclusion, so I might differ a little bit there, but here's what she had to say. Here's the quote. If you were to look within the asset class of crypto, if any asset could be considered safe haven more reliably, I'd say that's Bitcoin. Just given its core utility has always been this concept of a store of value, so it would be the natural beneficiary of that core utility case. Bitcoin has still been the best performing asset so far year to date, up almost 40%. So let's pause there. There's more to the quote, but I gotta stop right there before we go any further. So as far as if any asset can be considered a safe haven more reliable, you'd say it's Bitcoin. Okay, well, I dispute that. I do have a different opinion, because it's clear, despite the fact that, as stated here, and it's fair enough, Bitcoin's up year to date. If that's the timeline you want to look at, year to date, Bitcoin's up 40%. XRP not looking so hot, relatively speaking, right? But if you zoom out on a chart, just go back to the beginning of XRP and match that chart up with Bitcoin, you can see that XRP, like every other altcoin, is doing this. They're all doing the same thing. All altcoins are just following the price action of Bitcoin. So to this point, if Bitcoin is a store of value, if you want to make that claim that it's a safe haven asset, you'd have to acknowledge that the rest of the asset class is following, and others at Ripple even have acknowledged this, including Ripple CTO, co-creator of the XRP ledger and XRP itself, David Schwartz. He has cited this, that he's surprised how closely XRP follows the price action of Bitcoin. So if you're going to make the case that Bitcoin is a safe haven and it's a store of value, then I think you should certainly make the case that the rest of the asset class is as well. And I don't think that it's going to stay like this. I just think that since we're in the nascency of this asset class, that people are treating these coins in a very similar fashion in terms of buying and selling, and not parsing out the notable differences in terms of the actual technology in meaningful adoption, aka utility. So I do feel differently there. And then she said, just given its core utility has always been this concept of a store of value, so it would be the natural beneficiary of that core utility case. I dispute that as well. Its core utility case in the beginning, it definitely certainly has not been the store of value narrative. In the beginning, it was in the white paper that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote, a peer-to-peer cash system. That was the use case. This idea of store of value, that has taken over, as we saw. It just kind of shifted into that as a natural progression as more and more people bought into that narrative because, frankly, it can't do anything else. It's not going to work as cash. It's not going to replace fiat currency. It can't even be used in addition to fiat currency as a means for actual payment because it's too slow, it's too costly. And on top of that, there's not a bunch of demand to get outside of fiat currency. There's not enough because there's not enough friction in the world for most people. I have just a fine user experience with the United States dollar, which isn't to say that there isn't room for improvement. It's not. I'm just telling you, there's not enough friction for people to be willing to jump outside of the world of fiat currency en masse in 2020. I think there could be a strong use case for it in the future. I'm just saying it's not here. There's not enough friction. As friction increases, you'll have a better opportunity at selling it. But even then, you better have the appropriate technology lined up or adoption won't take hold anyway. That technology, I'm sorry, my friends, it is not Bitcoin, not even with Lightning Network, because Lightning Network doesn't work and is a centralized solution here. And here's the rest of her quote. Markets love transparency, and so that is what makes Bitcoin very attractive in many respects because it's forecastable and people understand exactly what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And I think markets love that sense of certainty. If you look at the past two halvenings, prior to the most recent one, we saw a rally into it, but also between the date of the halvening and anywhere between 12 and 18 months after, we saw continued appreciation and then the eventual high. So there's a lot of reason to be particularly optimistic about not just Bitcoin, but also other digital assets. Now that part, that's not as controversial as she's just talking about actual data points there. And sure enough, that is true. And the rest of the market, again, continued to follow Bitcoin. So sure, yeah, I don't really have any qualms with that one. Now Madigan says she also, she expects investors to increasingly broaden their horizons beyond Bitcoin as the crypto industry matures, which, by the way, is something that your boy Moon Lambo's been saying the entire time I've been running this channel for, which is about a year and a half now, man. Wow, time flies, doesn't it? So here's another quote from her. I think we're going to see investors that were previously Bitcoin-only maximalists expand into other altcoins as we develop increased utility and use cases for digital assets broadly. And I think as those utility cases grow, you're going to see a much higher rate of institutional investors crossing over with macro hedge funds, including some allocation to crypto as an asset class, as sort of a rule of thumb, not the exception. Which is another thing I've been saying endlessly on this channel. As far as inflows into XRP, new money coming in, okay, it's fair enough to make a point that maybe some maximalists are going to open their eyes. Don't hold your breath, though. If they're actually maximalists, they're probably going to really stand their ground for as long as possible. But as far as maturation of the asset class, well, certainly it makes sense that as it becomes super duper clear that the asset class is here to stay, and it becomes more clear the more time passes. Oh my God, that Bitcoin thing's still here. Yeah, well, people notice that asset class, it's still here. And then as you see that specific cryptocurrencies are beginning to be utilized in the real world, like XRP is a bridge currency for cross-border payments and settlements, well, you might think, so businesses need that to continue to conduct their business model. Might it be a good idea to hold on to this as a store of value, as a speculator? Because I know that businesses are going to need this. That instills confidence. Might that be? And that's just one use case for XRP, by the way. Might that change the way that institutional investors adopt? Might it bring more institutional money into the space as those institutions continue to look into this, as it increasingly becomes clear that it makes sense that this asset class is here to stay, and diversification in general is a good thing amongst various asset classes? Don't you think? Well, I sure do. Now, Ripple holds more than half of the total supply of XRP, and Madigan says the company is pushing to make the digital asset the core component of a global money transfer revolution. And here's another quote from her. We are looking at solving a real-world problem leveraging XRP, which is how do we get assets from one country to another without having to go through the legacy Nostro Vostro account system. And that is a complete game changer. We've never had the availability to send money across border as rapidly as we can, leveraging our own our own on-demand liquidity platform, what we call ODL. And that, to me, represents real utility for the use case of digital assets. Exactly. Firmly agree with that. And it's the only cryptocurrency being used in the commercial production of anything still in 2020. How about that? Regulatory concerns are still a top priority at Ripple, says Madigan. She expects laws guiding the use of cryptocurrency to become increasingly clear as the pace of crypto asset adoption rises. And here's the final quote in this piece from her. I think there are a number of issues still that we as an industry have to address around legacy concerns about security or about the operational risks of trading in the asset class or regulatory certainty. All of those things we're making a ton of progress on, but until we remove a number of those significant hurdles, I think you will see slower adoption. That's another thing I keep saying on this channel. Well, I mean, that one's an obvious one, though. Fair enough, right? I think we're all kind of preaching that, right? As the adoption rates increase, we will see greater participation from traditional institutional investors. And I think as we do see traditional investors come in, the volatility will be reduced over time. Exactly. Absolutely. Because people are acting irrationally because there's a frenzy around the technology. And also, the less money there is in the space, the easier it is. So we're talking less liquidity, less volume. The easier it is for that there to be extreme volatility, and the easier it is for a whale to come in and manipulate. So, we keep on moving forward. I'm all for it. Just wait. Can you imagine another 5-10 years out what this is all going to look like? Just think with the maturation of the asset class. Think with the real-world usage of XRP. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm happy with my front row seat checking it all out. And as long as exciting things are happening, I'm going to be here running this channel in perpetuity. And I'm glad I'm not the only weirdo that finds this level of detail interesting on a daily basis. I'm glad that there are tons, just hundreds of thousands of you out there that are interested to that degree, and that a certain number of you are interested enough in what I put out to follow regularly. So a very sincere thank you for that as well. That's it for this video. I am not a financial advisor. Do not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the moon, Lambo!